Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Already
Dowhouse,
hearing about this or pointless in fantasy in the sense.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
But we have other people who need to debate now. All right, so now Pete's going to be in the hot seat, and he's going to be taking on Adam because Pete likes Mason Taylor, while Adam likes Oronde Gadsden. Chase is going to be the one to judge it. Pete, state your case.
Yeah, so I've been a really big Mason Taylor fan since the process started. I think when you look at Mason Taylor and when you just I talked a little bit about before, but when you look at the tight end position in the NFL, like you're looking for balance. That's the best way that I can put it. It's nice to look for guys, and the two guys that we just talked about are the exact opposite of balance. They're two guys that, have decently high ceilings, but they're not the most well-rounded players at the position. Mason Taylor pretty much checks off all the boxes for me. He's a solid blocker. He's a guy that's going to likely be on the field in pretty much any situation. And I think it says something to be a guy who started all 3 years at a program like LSU and has that pedigree of coming, from a family of obviously Jason Taylor. He has that bloodline and lineage. And when I look at Mason Taylor just in general, I mean, look, 55 receptions, 546, 2 touchdowns, college dominator rating of 11.5%. College target share wasn't that high, but he's in a really good offense that features a lot of really good players. Now, maybe not this year as much, but you look at the year before and, you had Brian Thomas Jr., you had Malik Neighbors too. And so I don't know. When I look at Mason Taylor, he jumps out on the film for a guy who he's decisively maybe not the fastest guy, but he showed up really well in the combine too. I feel like when you looked at all the tight ends, guys like Warren who didn't test, I don't think Arroyo tested either. You had Fannin who tested, and we just talked about that. It wasn't as sexy and what we were looking for. I look at like a Dalton Schultz kind of comp where, it's not, he's not the most exciting player, but he's a guy that will likely stick around for a long time. I'm not foaming at the mouth saying, Mason Taylor's a guy that I can't wait to get my hands on in fantasy, but this is a guy that I think is going to stick in the NFL for a while. And when it comes to tight ends, that's something that's important to me, right? Not a guy that's going to flame out quickly. It's a slow developing position, and coming from that lineage, I think, he's a capable blocker, like I said. And so, I don't know. I really like Mason Taylor. I mean, the other guy we're going up against here is Gadsden, correct, from Syracuse?
Correct.
Right. So, I mean, Gadsden from Syracuse, I'll say it, you have to be an elite athlete for me at the tight end position if you're not that great at blocking. Lower body strength is a little bit of a concern when I watch him. I did like the tape from Syracuse, but look, he lacks play strength as well. Like he's not a guy that's kind of fighting through tackles as much. And the blocking technique, as I said, kind of remains a little bit of question mark. He is an athletic player, 6'5", 243, a young breakout age at 19 years old. He's 21.7 now, which is definitely encouraging, as we said before, but I don't think he's likely to go in the first two in the first 2 days. So he's probably getting day 3 capital. And if that's the case, when it comes to tight end position, there's so many Jags and just guys, and a guy that's not going to get day 1 or day 2 capital, which I think Mason Taylor does get. I mean, there's rumors that Mason Taylor could even be as high as the Eagles at 32. I don't think that actually happens. Todd McShay is talking about it as a possibility, but I think Mason Taylor is going to get the higher draft capital, and I'd rather take a chance on a guy that's going to get the higher draft capital that likely stays. But I mean, I'm all for drafting guys that have high upside, late in rookie drafts at tight end as well. That's usually a fun spot I like to target too. But that would be my case for Taylor over Gadsden.
All right, Adam. Why is Gadsden? You got him at number 4.
Yeah, I like Gadsden a lot. I think the first thing that I'll throw out there is I agree he's not there at a run blocker yet, and I agree on the play strength portion. What I'll say there is, I mean, he switched over from wide receiver to tight end relatively recently, and I think with that in regard, I was impressed as a run blocker, like with that context in mind. I think that he's made leaps and bounds since that sophomore season, especially considering that he did not play last season or only played a game and a half due to injury. And with that being said, I thought he looked, for a guy who had a list rank like a year ago or a little bit over at the time of the combine, I thought he looked very athletic. Again, with that context in mind, and he was a bit more of a field stretcher when we saw him that sophomore season getting 16 yards per catch. One of the things that I was really excited about him in terms of potentially being able to fill out that frame a little bit more is, I mean, he is a guy with 67th percentile arm length and 85th percentile wingspan. He's got range. He's got a massive catch radius, and I think he uses it fairly well. And I thought it showed up in blocking too. Again, agreed with the actual power portions of it. But when you saw him with guys that matched up a little bit better strength-wise, he was able to keep them off of his body because he has longer arms than, I mean, candidly, some of the DNs in this class. And I think that's really impressive, and somewhere where, I mean, it's a 180 in regards to Mason Taylor, who, no doubt in my mind, the much more technically proficient blocker at this moment in time, but a guy who is kind of, stuck in that regards with a 21st percentile arm length and a 41st percentile or 45th rather percentile wingspan. Just someone who, I mean, look, if you get like up in his chest, like the D lineman's going to win. And ideally you're avoiding that situation. He is someone who I actually have the same comparison in Dalton Schultz, so no disagreement there. And also, I'm not going to disagree in regards to him potentially being the safer pick and the guy who, longer NFL career. I think for me, at least in regards to a pre-draft ranking, I'm not necessarily going to take those things into account from a pure fantasy perspective. If put into their best position, I think Gadsden results in better fantasy production. Better NFL player, I wouldn't argue that strongly against Mason Taylor. But if one of them's getting into a big slot role, a role where they're getting 100 targets, I think that's far more likely for Gadsden. So that's kind of just my inclination there. I mean, you mentioned it with Taylor, he hasn't been like a massive target earner. I don't disagree that over his career there that, there's been a lot of talent, but it wasn't that crazy at LSU this past year. And Nussmeier was a really good quarterback, so I'm not necessarily questioning him on who he was getting the ball to. So for me, I think that Mason Taylor as an average NFL tight end, not going to argue too strongly against it, but pre-draft, I'm just willing to take the swing a bit more. If NFL GMs disagree with me too hard, then I'm going to adjust for draft capital post-draft anyways, so that's no problem. I'll probably flip them if Mason Taylor, for instance, goes in the second and Gadsden goes in the fifth, then I would switch it by draft time. And thankfully, I'm not drafting Dynasty or at all right now. So personally,
nobody make it very clear. All right, Chase, decide.
Okay, let me preface this real quick by saying that I have Gadsden ranked one spot ahead of Mason Taylor, and yeah, Pete, you're much more optimistic on Mason Taylor than I am. But Adam tried his best to give that argument away there, apologizing for his dude so much it felt like. But just let me go through my notes real quick on these two here. You mentioned, Pete, balance in terms of a tight end. We had just talked about that, about how, I had talked about how I like the idea of a guy that is going to be on the field more. I think can find himself on the field more. And I do like that with Mason Taylor. The other thing I like about Mason Taylor is his literal contact balance. I think that I have a note here. I like him better with the ball in his hand than beforehand. I don't like him necessarily until he gets that ball in his hand. One of the things I really like to see it when Mason Taylor actually can catch the football and turn upfield and do something with it. It seemed like every time I watched film on him, every target, and Nussmeier, people can have their opinions on him, but it seemed like every time he targeted Mason Taylor had to make some kind of a reaching, diving, sliding, twisting, adjust to the football catch. I don't know what it was specifically about his targets that Nussmeier kind of seemed to go asleep on. But once Mason Taylor gets that ball in his hand, I really like to watch him play football. I think he adjusts well to the ball to that point too. So I saw a lot of that, and I like those things on him there. With Oronde Gadsden, he's 6'5", but there's times on film where he looks like he's 7'5", and that can be a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, sometimes it's because he's reaching all over the place. Adam alluded to his 12.5-foot wingspan at like an albatross, but there's also times trying to come in and out of breaks where he's not quite as sharp and crisp as I'd like to see. And I get that's probably tough at 6'5". I'm 5'5", so I don't have that problem. But the thing I like about Gadsden is that I think he is a guy that you can move around the formation a little bit. Whereas I see Taylor a little bit more limited in how you can deploy him there. And I think that speaks to the idea that Gadsden comes from, as Adam said, comes from that wide receiver background there. He's got nice natural hands, I think Gadsden does. I like his body control in the air. I like him around the boundary. The way that, his awareness of where he's at on the field. He's good at contested catches, which is good because I don't see a separator when I look on film from him. I tend to agree with you there that Mason Taylor, Pete, I agree with you, Pete, that Mason Taylor looks like the more, well-rounded football player. And I like him from that standpoint, and I like him to have a good career from that standpoint. But I've said it before on this show, and Adam, you kind of touched on the same thing just now. When I'm looking at draft prospects, I'm looking at them purely from a fantasy standpoint. What do I see as fantasy upside here? And when I watch Oronde Gadsden play football and receive the football, and with the things that I think that he can do and the things that I think he still can learn as a tight end, I really like the idea. There's a little bit of Darren Waller-ness maybe to his game, where if he can stay healthy, and I don't see that necessarily being a problem, the Liz Frank, notwithstanding, I like the idea of Oronde Gadsden as a fantasy asset a little bit better. So it's close because we had an argument here for a guy having a better NFL career, and I'm not disagreeing with that argument, but I'm going to give it to Gadsden. I'm going to give it to Adam just based on the idea that, like I said, from a fantasy standpoint, I see him having a little bit more of an explosive potential.
And if I could close my side out, I think, in fantasy, especially at the tight end position, right? Like, we're looking for any type of juice that we can get, because there's tons of guys that, Zach Ertz is still putting up numbers, right? And he's old as dirt, right? Like, we can find the Mason Taylors of the world, right? And so I definitely understand from a standpoint with Gadsden. I just think Mason Taylor has more upside than it appears. I think, as you alluded to, I think when he has the ball in his hands, he's a better playmaker than people give him. He ran a sub 4.7, which I don't think people were expecting at the 40 with the 40. Now, I don't put too much stock into 40-yard dash, because very rarely do we see guys run in a straight line on the football field. So I'm not totally concerned about that. I think with Gadsden, I think my fear is we talk about developing, and when it's such a hard position to develop at, and you're that weak as a blocker, I worry about how much time the NFL is going to give you. And at that point, in rookie drafts for me, I'd rather swing on a running back likely that, like, in those rounds. I know we're kind of shifting conversation a little bit, and I don't mean to take it that way, but in my head, like, I'd rather take a shot on a third round rookie draft, or a third round running back in this rookie class, or even a guy that goes in the fourth or fifth round, because it's such a deep class and there's a lot of talent, over a tight end who's probably going to get day 3 capital and it's going to be a project, and likely you might end up dropping him after a year because you have no patience anyway. And again, my concern is I don't think he's a good enough playmaker to get him on the field enough as a pass catcher, because he lacks as a blocker so much. So I don't want to bring up the argument. I already kind of gave mine, but I was kind of thinking about some of those things as we kind of spoke, and I kind of wanted to share them. So
I've got them one space apart, 7 and 8. So I'm not strong either way.
Well, Pete, let me ask you this, because I'm more in line with you. I have Taylor at my number 5, and Gadsden's my tight end 12. I think it's more probable that Gadsden winds up as a tight end 3 and never sees the light of day than he does flash. I got him comped to a Jared Wiley in that sense. And I comp Mason Taylor. Someone said it earlier, Tyler Eifert. I see a lot of Tyler Eifert actually in Mason Taylor's game. But I do want to ask you this about Mason Taylor, because this is the one thing that does bother me quite a bit. especially this past year, when he comes into LSU and he's supposed to be a guy that's actually going to be featured, right? The wide receivers exit him. Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas gone. He's supposed to be one of the main weapons. And then he, once again, even as a featured weapon, can't really get it done in the red zone. I mean, this is a guy who had 6 career touchdowns, 2 last year when he was being targeted more. And that bothers me at the tight end position, because unless you're a high volume guy, you have to score touchdowns to ever be a top 10 candidate. That's the one thing that bothers me about Taylor. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the one thing, and I don't want to put too much stock into the Senior Bowl, but what I would say is, he seemed to really stand out in those red zone drills. Now, look, if you're running on air, I don't put too much stock into that either. I mean, but he seemed to hold his own pretty well against other competition, and I liked seeing him run routes and be able to separate, because that's a concern. The production in the red zone wasn't there, and that's definitely something that would be a concern. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought about that too much. I'll give you some credit there, but it's not something that's overly concerning. I get that they lost some weapons. You would hope that he would take a step forward there, but to me, the fact that he was even a starter at LSU as a true freshman is in and of itself a plus for there. So I can understand the level of concern. I don't really have much to kind of push back on that and say this is why you shouldn't be concerned. He's just going to need to find himself in the right offense, which is pretty much most tight ends outside of, I'll give Tyler Warren. I don't think it matters where he goes. I think he's going to be good no matter what, where some of these other guys, if they get drafted into a situation with a decent guy in front of them, it might be frustrating to own them in fantasy.
I tend to agree with that. All right, we still have one more debate. All right, Pete, loosen up those shoulders. I know you just went hard round. You got another round you got to get in here, bud, because you're going to be doing Terrance Ferguson versus Chris, who's representing Gunnar Helm. Adam is going to judge. Chris, we'll have you talk first since Pete needs a break.
So, look, Gunnar Helm's a guy that everybody's just going to kill about athleticism because we saw in the combine. He's 4.84. He didn't have a good vertical. I don't know if he was injured. If he's not injured, I'm not really sure. What I do know for a fact was what I saw at that combine, it was not what I saw on tape going in. And I initially penalized him, and I kind of pushed down the board. We talked about our show and reactions to some guys, who definitely suffered in the combine. But going back, I look at a guy who, Pete talked about it. Gunnar Helm to me is a guy who can do a little bit of everything, and that gets you in the field. Chase talked about that as well. We want to find guys who can get out there. Gunnar Helm's a willing blocker. That's kind of how he came up in Texas. He has a chance to kind of shine. Came this year where they moved him from the inline to outline and kind of allowed him to motion. But I like that flexibility where he has familiarity with both being used in both things. You see a guy who definitely has a basketball background, and that's what I look for guys when it comes to for tight end positions. One or two things. I do like athletes. We talked about some other guys before. Pete was talking about some of the athletes, whether the athletics, 4.71s, how it stands out or not. I like to tall the athletic guys, but I also like guys who know how to use their body. To me, that's the most important thing as a tight end. You could dominate like Antonio Gates. You could dominate like different ways, like Tony Gonzalez. There's different ways to dominate tight end position, but you have to be able to do things really well. And that's where I see a guy who understands where to be. He's a quarterback's best friend. Every time there was a big situation, whether it was Arch or Ewers, if they had somebody to look for, they weren't looking for the Bond, they weren't looking for Golden yet, looking for the tight end position. And it was a guy who consistently came up for him. A guy who was also pretty decent after yards after the catch. For all the questions about athleticism, averaged 6.6 yards after the catch, one of the higher guys for over 600 yards and the amount of targets he had. So when you look at things that were projectable in the NFL, you talked about Dalton Schultz, some of those guys. To me, he's at least going to be an average tight end, and I think that here's some upside that I saw on tape, and there's some things I think that can definitely, talk about Zach Ertz and how he kind of still is out there. To me, this is a guy who can age well out there as well. He's not going to be built on using his athleticism to dominate the game. What he's going to be able to do is, I know where to be, I know how to attack the ball, and I don't drop the ball when I catch it. So I think all those things are good for him. While I look at Ferguson as a guy who spent a lot of time in Oregon, wasn't the full-time starting tight end for most of the season, even not, having some solid production over the last few years. The athleticism was something that definitely jumped out. You definitely get excited when you saw what he was able to do at the combine. But most of what I saw, this is a little similar to Hal Fannin, I saw mostly a guy who's getting thrown screens and a lot of things within 5 to 7 yards, things I don't necessarily think are going to materialize for this guy in the next level, or offensive game plans are going to be, designing 4 or 5 plays to get him involved through the screen or 5-yard passes. So I have some questions about what that athleticism materializes as. And this is more of a thing for me where I have a trust of what I see on tape and a guy who I think I can see playing from day one versus a guy who has a lot of athletic talent, a guy who I hope can develop something, a guy that I think can be something. I'm not down on Ferguson per se, but I don't think he's got necessarily the same pathway to what I trust versus a guy who I think is going to be a tight end, a good football player already on tape versus a guy who I'm hoping those skills wind up translating at some point.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I just came out of a conversation between 2 tight ends where one is maybe not as sexy, but projects to be a guy that can probably stick around longer in the NFL in Gunnar Helm and probably Mason Taylor, though I think Taylor's a better athlete. And then now Terrance Ferguson, who we look at as a high ceiling upside player, and kind of similar in the last conversation that we had. When I look at Terrance Ferguson, if I am taking that upside swing, which we kind of talked about before, on the tight end position, I'd like a guy like him just because I think he's better at blocking than given credit for. So with his athletic ability, I do think he can still find himself on the field in situations for downs where he maybe has to block, and he fits well in like a zone blocking scheme, right? He can kind of move pretty well to set edges, and with him, he has natural hands too, where he only had 2 drops in college, in his college career. So he has reliable hands. So he's a good safety valve and somebody who, look, like a guy that maybe isn't going to get high draft capital. You're just looking for him not to make mistakes to make a roster, especially when coaches, when you think about what they're looking for, and a guy that can show reliable hands, that's not going to make mistakes, he's going to be a willing blocker, and's not going to drop the football, is a guy that I think coaches are going to be more willing to give a chance to stick on a roster. I think he's a pretty good route runner, finds zones, soft zones pretty well and sits in them. Now, to your point, I think he did have a pretty decently low depth of target in terms of like a lot of screens, a lot of manufactured touches. But I don't think you make manufactured touches for guys that aren't athletic too. And so to me, that just shows that they want to get the ball in his hands in space and let him work. And that's really the Oregon offense in a nutshell. I mean, look at Bo Nix, right? People looked at him and thought, yeah, it's all this easy throws. Look at Gabriel last year. Like, it just felt like these easy throws, these layups, but that's really just the offense. I don't think it was a product of Ferguson just not being able to stretch the field. And I think it had just more to do with the system that he was in. But all in all, I actually liked Gunnar Helm. I think it was unfortunate that he just didn't have a great combine. I think he was hurt. There was some talk. I think it was his ankle, if I remember correctly, and somebody can check me on that. But I think he had a little bit of an ankle injury. And when you talk about weapons around him, Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, who everyone seems to love this year, even though he didn't have a lot of production actually on the field in college football, but he flashes on tape. But look, 6'5", 241. I mean, he didn't have a huge target share, but he had decent players around him in a good offense. I wish he would have done more, but overall, he just looks tight on the field when he runs. He's not fluid. He just reminds me of a dude that's just, when you look at like a plotter running back, like if there was a description for what that would be for a tight end, like that's what he reminds me of. Like, just slow, heavy feet, like just, but he can anchor. He can be a guy that can stick around in the NFL. It's just for fantasy football, you guys kind of alluded to it before. Like we talked about it, like he's not sexy, though. I think when we talked about Mason Taylor, I think he has that upside and has some more yards after catch ability. With Helm, I think he's going to stick in the NFL. He played at a big time program, but I just worry that like, what's his ceiling for production? Like a tight end, like a Mo Alley Cox. I'm not saying he is Mo Alley Cox, but that's just what it reminds me of, like a guy that scores a couple touchdowns, and has like 15, 20 catches on the season kind of thing is what I would think, where he's in there for blocking downs. He can run block and all that. So, yeah, I mean, that would be my argument there.
Gunnar Helm was the guy at the combine who false started on his 40 attempt twisted his ankle and then still completed all of his drills at the combine. So in his defense there, I agree with you. He doesn't look fast to me, but in his defense, yes, he was injured at the combine. He did it on his 40 attempt, in fact.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this conversation, unlike the last one, is that there's not a gap in draft capital. I mean, right now, projected draft capital for Ferguson's 97, Gunnar Helm's 103. Like they're neck and neck. So, Adam, this will be an interesting one for you to judge. Go ahead, bud.
Yeah, no, to me, this is like the more further on the extremes of the last conversation. I'm more confident in Gadsden's ability to develop as a blocker than I am in Ferguson's, and I like Gunnar Helm's nuances, I think, a little bit more than Mason Taylor's, but where I have Mason Taylor a touch higher is because I don't see the explosiveness potential for Helm. I do lean Ferguson here. I'll get that out of the way early. My reasoning being, and I do like Helm, and I agree with that argument. First of all, however, on the whole, Gunnar Helm argument, good. One caveat I'm just going to throw in there, just a little nade I'm going to lob in here, is that the average depth of target was actually deeper this past season for Ferguson. That besides the point. For me, I think it is just the case of upside. Gunnar Helm, I actually think, going back to the Mason Taylor thing, I think that there is a world where Gunnar Helm becomes like a real target earner because of just being in the right places. But I think it would be like, here's my Colts fan coming out of me. I think it would be like that Jack Doyle. I'm just by the line of scrimmage. I'm open. I'm going to catch the ball like every time you throw it to me. So I'm here, and that's fine. I just don't know that you ever get like real good upside from it. It's not a direct comparison, by the way. Jack Doyle's a better run blocker, but just in the sense that the QB best friend thing I do see as a possibility for Gunnar Helm. With Terrance Ferguson, again, at pre-draft especially when I'm talking about these things, I'm just willing to take the gamble. We talked about it. There's not a lot of guys who can make a living going down the field at the tight end position. Terrance Ferguson is a guy who has the athleticism to do that, but the experience is the short yard guy. So if it's an offense that is using it how the NFL likes to use their tight ends right now, that's fine. I could run routes close to the line of scrimmage. I've been doing that. However, you want to see a guy who, we're talking 98th percentile vert, 91st percentile broad jump. Like, I'm going to burst off the line of scrimmage, and I'm going to I can get down the field, and I've been successful doing that when I have had those opportunities, even though they're few and far between due to Oregon's offense. Like, that's something to me that's exciting. We've seen it at the tight end position ultimately that, like, offensive line and tight end are the positions that are most likely to be determined by athleticism. Like, the athleticism is the greatest predictor at those positions specifically. So when it comes to like a 91st percentile overall athlete like Terrance Ferguson, I'm just going to give him the nod personally.
Doesn't hurt when you're the tight end actually ran the fastest 40 and one of the tight ends who actually showed up the combine too. So it all plays.
And like frame wise, right? Like, he's the guy with the better wingspan. He's the guy with the bigger hands. He's the guy with like, it's not just, I'm fast. Like, weight wise, you go Helm, but everything else you lean Ferguson, like in terms of size.
All right. So that wraps up all of our debates. We have one last thing we want to get to before we close out this show. We want to give you one sleeper tight end per person. Pete, you're the guest. You go first. Who's somebody you want to highlight as a sleeper in your ranks?
Yeah, it's actually funny because I realized that I selected a player that was already talked about, so I'm shifting here. So I'm going to talk about Jake Bringstool, even though I wasn't prepared to talk about him. I'll throw him up there anyway since he wasn't talked about too much. But this is a guy that took a little bit of time to to make his hay. I believe he only had 3 catches as a freshman in college, but he projects really more as like a specialized passing game weapon. And again, this is a guy who likely would be a 5th round kind of dart throw in your rookie drafts, right? Maybe even doesn't even go drafted. But we talk about upside and swings, and if I'm going to draft anybody, I'm really looking for upside. I mean, you're not really looking for safe late in rookie drafts, but he's got a decent blend. He played basketball, right? So he has that basketball-ish frame at the tight end position, which you love to see. A lot of comps you'll look out there, people think like Josh Wiley, another kind of tall, lanky pass catcher. But coming out of Clemson, And wasn't necessarily, like I said, he bursted onto the scene. Again, I wasn't necessarily really prepared to talk about him, so I don't have stats in front of me for him specifically right now. But that'll be my short and sweet on him. Someone who I think could be worth a dart throw. Just because of his athletic ability, and I think there's a solid chance maybe he gets round 5, round 6 capital, which wouldn't be too bad for a guy with his athletic profile.
Well, I'll help you out a little bit with the stats because I do got him in front of me. So he had 73 targets last year, 49 catches, 531 yards, 7 touchdowns. So not bad production all the way around. Was in the top 40 in missed forced tackles, top 8 in contested catches, and he ran a okay 1.27 yards per route run. Not bad when you're talking about a day 3 tight end with some upside there. So yeah, nice pick by you. He is somebody who is consistently being drafted in the NFL draft, which is another big thing with some of these tight ends. We talk about them later on. Chase, I want to get to your sleeper guy. Who do you got? Chase, I think you're muted or something.
There we go. Hey, how's that? I've got Ben Yurosek, tight end from Georgia, although he kind of actually made his bones at Stanford. He didn't do a ton at Georgia last season. But this is a guy, I mean, we've talked about a couple of guys who have some all world kind of genetics here with Oronde Gadsden, the second, and we talked about Mason Taylor with Jason Taylor and his uncle, I believe, is Zach Thomas. Ben Yurosek's a guy whose dad played football at Colorado State. His mom played D1 volleyball at Colorado State. So he's got some pedigree as well, but he had a shoulder injury in 2023, didn't play, a whole heck of a lot that year. And then last year he transferred from Stanford so he could escape that horrific quarterback play alleged quarterback play, what they call out there. Transferred to Georgia for his senior season here. Kind of ended up playing behind Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky. Both those guys were returnees as they kind of tried to figure out who was going to replace Brock Bowers for them. They found out there is no replacing Brock Bowers, no matter how many guys you try to throw at the problem. But Yurosek wasn't utilized as the biggest passing back or passing tight end of the 3. He was the best blocker of the 3, though, by far. They used him that way. He didn't get quite the usage in the pass game the other 2 did. But he is a willing blocker. He's got good form. He plays well that way. But this is a guy who's not just a blocker. This is a guy in 2022 was second on Stanford in receptions. He was third on the team in yards. In 2021, he led Stanford in yards, and he was second in receptions. I mentioned the shoulder injury in 2023. But he's a guy who over the course of his career played in line half the time, but he's able to move around the formation. You can deploy him in other ways there. When I watch him on tape, especially stuff from Stanford, but even, the stuff that he did when he was targeted last season at Georgia, I like the receiving skills that he's shown there. He's not great after the catch, but the receiving skills. He's not an electric athlete, but the actual catching the football part of things, I really like. He concentrates well. He tracks the ball well, catches with his hands, contested or otherwise. So I like that ability. I like that skill set of his. And then I talked about him as a blocker. He's 6'4", 242. So he's not the biggest guy that we've talked about tonight, but he's not small. He's not, teeny tiny Harold Fannin or anything like that. He blocks bigger than he is, which sounds funny coming from a guy 5'5", but I look for those kinds of things. He went to Stanford, so he's smart, right? And it just in all, I think that Ben Yurosek looks like a really well-rounded player at that position, and I think he could be a real steal in the draft. I wish he could have played with an actual quarterback at Stanford, so we could have seen, he may not have transferred for that senior year. He may have stayed there and actually been able to put forth some production that would still stick out in people's minds, because I understand we're drafting in 2025, and the last time we're talking about him as a producer is 2023, but this is a kid that can play some football, if he's healthy and if he goes to the right spots. So Ben Yurosek, somebody's on my radar.
All right, Chris, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech, a guy that went to Arizona State previous, a guy who has a really nice wingspan for his size, about 6'4", 260. I like that he was 275 for most of the season. He played at moved. What I like about that is the sense that he actually lost weight for the combine. One of the big knocks on him was kind of his effort all the time. It was he a guy that's always going to give it all. But we talk a lot about our excitement about, our number one tight end on our boards. Tyler Warren, all the things he can do, how they use him in a wildcat, how they have him throw touchdowns and all the things. Well, Jalen Connors did all those things too. Jalen Connors threw 2 touchdown passes. A guy would line up at fullback, line up at H-back, line up all different places on the field, has been utilized as a running back as well, had 20 carries a couple seasons ago. So a guy that you can see utilized in a lot of different ways, has been a weapon. And like I said, the big knock against him had been that, is it always going to get the all-out effort? Is he in shape? You saw some progress with that. You see a pretty good athlete. You see guys who are much smaller than him run similar 40s. And I like the vertical. I like the ability to go high point the ball. So I'm big on guys, if you're going to be a seam stretcher, and it can't just be fast since they stretch the seam to be able to go up and tack the ball. And I like the power forward body, Dan. I think a guy who looks kind of Draymond Green in the sense out there, has really long arms, has a good body, kind of blocks you out, but also, like I said, able to high point the ball really well. So Jalen Connors is a guy that people aren't talking a lot about, been pretty productive, and like I said, has a lot of different ways to get on the field.
Cheat code phrases in fantasy football: quarterback mobility, basketball player, tight end. I mean, we're gonna have to coin it. We gotta come up with a better phrase than that, but we're gonna have to coin that somehow. Adam, what do you got?
Yeah, for me, I mean, candidly, like outside of the guys we talked about at the top, he's the only one who just meets like thresholds that I have to care about you for fantasy as a tight end. And look, we talked about it off the jump of the show about the narrative around the tight end class. I think I'm a little bit lower on it than the average person, to be candid. But Joshua Simon, to me, does meet some of these thresholds. Talk about the athleticism. I mean, admittedly, some of the explosiveness doesn't necessarily show on tape as much as I would love, but you love that it's in there at the very least. But look, 96th percentile wingspan, 83rd percentile arm length, literally meets the offensive tackle thresholds at arm length. Massive hands, good 40, good better 10-yard split as far as the 40 goes, and the burst score is outrageous with a 93rd percentile vert and a 91st percentile broad jump. Someone who started his collegiate career at Western Kentucky. He is a doctor in the sense that he spent 6 years in college. Having said that, he is an early breakout in the sense that you wouldn't think it based on the statistics, but his target earned percentage is actually fairly high those first 2 seasons, especially the second, because that Western Kentucky team couldn't throw the football for shit. No better way to say it. Like, I think they had 1,900 yards his sophomore season. He got 400. Damn it, that's like 20%. So, like, it's kind of the reality of the situation he was put in. I think he made the most of it. Transferred out to South Carolina, where first season of South Carolina didn't do too much, but he was in a bit of a timeshare. His yards per out run was actually pretty solid, and this year, was for the most part the guy. As far as his hands, I thought they were on the whole average, but something I really liked is he didn't have too many drops in traffic. It felt like he wasn't that worried about getting hit, which is something at the tight end position that I like to see. You get a little bit of slot, like big slot, and actual inline tight end versatility. It wasn't my favorite run blocker, to say the least. And the route tree definitely has some polishing, but just to know that the athletic upside is there, he's got the frame. There were, again, he meets thresholds, and for a tight end class for me, like everyone after him is just not like someone I'm that interested in, to be honest with you.
I like it. All right, so I'll wrap it up with my guy, and that is Thomas Fidone. Love him, from Nebraska. And this is the reason why I love him, especially as a sleeper. When you're talking about these guys who are going later, I want somebody who has a chance to play all 3 downs. I actually kind of comped him to Hayden Hurst. Reminds me a lot of that skill set. Not going to blow you away with his athleticism, but does run good routes underneath. Can be that chain mover. Can be that quarterback best friend. At the same time, he's not an awful blocker. He might actually be left on the field in certain situations in short yardage and goal line and everything else. Was in the above average category according to PFF for his run blocking grades. 6'5", 243. His athletic combine was fine. It wasn't great, but it was fine. 4.7 flat on the 40, was 6 in his 10-yard split, was 3rd in his 3-cone drill, which shows up on tape with the way he can run routes. And Adam, you talked about your guy having offensive tackle measurables, 34-inch arm, 10 5/8 hands. So Fidone can play the inline, and he was able to play 50-50. He played in the slot and on inline almost about 50% of the time. So the guy can do both. Is the guy's not going to go to day 3 but I think he's a starting caliber NFL tight end who'll probably get a pickup off your waiver wire after your rookie drafts are done. Stash him on tax squad, depending upon where he lands. 1.41 yards per route run, not too shabby there. And he was also 24th in missed tackles force. That's what I said. Like, this is a bigger guy who's not flashy, but he can do all the little things you're looking for a starting tight end, and who could be maybe a top 15 tight end fantasy producer at some point in his career. With that, we're going to wrap up today's show. Pete, I want to thank you so much for coming on, banging out these tight ends with us. It was wonderful to have you on. Absolutely. I think you fit really well with the group too, actually. But what do you have working on? Where do you want people to follow you at?
Yeah, so I am currently working on it's in the works. I'm going to do a 32 team DST primer once the draft is done. Once we kind of get closer to training camp, it's hard that it's going to be so much changes with defense from year over year. So once we get the schedules and everything like that, I'm just going to kind of do some sort of primer. It's just going to be more of a fun exercise. I'm going to put it out there, maybe produce it in a PDF or some sort of book or something. I got to figure out how to get it out there and market it. But working with Player Profiler, just started with them. Just put out my first rookie mock draft. Excited to kind of start pushing out some content, as this NFL draft goes, and we can kind of sit here and stop talking about these rookies and projecting all these things and kind of have a better feel for what's going to happen. But I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully I can come back again.
Oh, we'll definitely have you on again, Pete, for sure. Are you going to the Expo this year?
I think I am. I think Hoff's going to come with me too. I think we're going to make the drive up together. So.
Awesome. We'll definitely be seeing you there. Fantasy Football Advice Network, we are sponsoring the event again this year. So, we'll all be there in full force. Can't wait for that. Also, can't wait for the draft next week. So, again, go to our YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. You'll be able to find us on there. We're going to have a big draft event from the Crow's Restaurant in Nashville. We are doing a second day too, but we're only going to be available if you're in the Midwestern Tennessee radio station, Fox Sports Station area. So you won't be able to see that on the stream, but first night we'll be live, giving away stuff, having a great old time, and giving you a lot of information in between. Download Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app. And guys, we'll see you next time. Hey there, I want to thank you for watching Operation Domination today. And if you're enjoying the show, there are some ways you can help support us. You can go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination and leave us a 5-star review. And you can do this on any podcast platform or on our YouTube page when you go to @FF Advice Network. This completely helps out the show be able to grow, and also leave us comments to let us know how we can curtail the show to you, because you are the most important member of the show. So again, go to podchaser.com/Operation Domination to leave a 5-star review and leave a comment wherever you listen or watch the show, and we'll help better serve you.